Everyone feared the Mafia boss's fiancée, until the maid punched her in front of everyone. She slapped the cook. She humiliated the gardener. She reduced a 17-year-old kitchen girl to tears in front of the entire staff and called it discipline. For 2 years, Celeste Vane ran that mansion like a warden runs a cell block, and not one soul dared breathe wrong in her presence. Then Laura Beckett walked through the gate on a Tuesday morning. By Friday, Celeste was picking herself up off the marble floor in front of everybody. And the most feared man in the city was standing in the doorway, watching, and not saying a word to stop it. If that kind of story is your speed, power, consequence, and the kind of backbone that changes everything, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. Now let's get into it. The Harwick estate sat at the end of a private road that the county map didn't bother naming. 3 stories of limestone and iron, surrounded by grounds that stayed immaculate year-round, because 12 people worked themselves to exhaustion making sure they did. From the outside, it looked like old money and good taste. From the inside, it looked like something considerably less comfortable. Laura Beckett had worked enough fine houses to know the difference between a home and a performance. The moment the iron gate swung open, and she walked up that gravel drive with her single bag and her sensible shoes, she could feel it. The particular tension that lives in walls where people are afraid. She had grown up around that feeling. She recognized it the way you recognize the smell of rain before it arrives. She was 34 years old, medium height, with the kind of face that people consistently underestimated, and the kind of eyes that noticed everything. She wasn't there to make friends or enemies. She was there to work, collect a fair wage, and conduct herself with the same dignity she brought to every room she entered, regardless of whose name was on the deed. The housekeeper, a tight-mouthed woman named Bess, met her at the side entrance and walked her through the kitchen with the speed of someone who had somewhere more important to be. The kitchen staff looked up briefly when Laura entered, and then looked away with the kind of careful disinterest that isn't disinterest at all. It's survival. Laura noted it without comment. It was in the back corridor, while Bess was showing her where the cleaning supplies were stored, that the first warning came. A young man named Percy, who worked the grounds, pressed close as Bess moved ahead and spoke low and fast into the space beside Laura's ear. "Stay out of her way," he said. "Whatever she says, just agree. Don't look at her too long. Don't look away too fast. And if she goes after somebody else, and she will, you keep your eyes on the floor. You didn't see it. You don't know anything about it. That's the only way you last here." Laura looked at him. He was maybe 25, with the eyes of someone considerably older. She thanked him quietly, and meant it. She spent her first hour learning the layout of the house, the back staircases, the linen storage, the rhythm of who moved where and when. She was methodical, and she was quick, and she was completely unremarkable about both, which was intentional. She had a gift for making herself part of the furniture when it suited her, and it suited her now. She was in the east corridor, rolling a linen cart when she heard it. A crash. The particular explosion of a full tray hitting marble. The cascade of breaking porcelain spreading across the floor in every direction. And then, before the echo had even finished, a voice. Celeste Vane's voice was not loud. That was the first thing Laura registered. It didn't need to be. It had been precision engineered over years of practice into something that cut without raising itself. A blade rather than a bludgeon. She was speaking to the kitchen girl who had dropped the tray, a child who couldn't have been more than 17, and she was taking her apart, piece by piece, in front of 8 members of staff, who were all finding the floor extremely interesting. Laura pushed her cart to the corridor entrance and stopped. The girl was on her knees, gathering broken pieces with shaking hands, apologizing in a continuous, desperate stream that Celeste was talking directly over, as though the apologies were simply ambient noise. Celeste was dressed like she was heading to a board meeting, cream silk, hair perfect, a diamond on her left hand that caught the light every time she gestured, which she did often and expansively. She was beautiful in the way that certain dangerous things are beautiful. She clearly knew it, and had long ago decided it was a license. Every staff member in that corridor had their eyes down. Every single one. Laura left her cart and walked forward. She crossed the corridor at a normal pace, not rushing, not hesitating. And when she reached the girl, she crouched down beside her and began gathering the broken pieces herself. The girl looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes full of confusion and something that looked like fear on Laura's behalf. "It was an accident," Laura said clearly, not loudly, clearly. "Accidents happen. Let's get this cleaned up." The corridor did not go quiet because it was already quiet. What it did was go a different kind of quiet, the kind that happens when something shifts in the atmosphere and every person present feels it simultaneously in their chest. Celeste stopped talking. The silence stretched like a wire. Laura continued gathering porcelain without looking up. "Excuse me." Celeste's voice had dropped to something almost conversational, which was somehow worse. "I don't believe I was finished." "The floor's a hazard," Laura said, still focused on the task. "Someone could cut themselves." The wire pulled tighter. From the upper landing above the corridor, where the wide staircase curved toward the second floor, a figure stood motionless in the shadow. Garrett Harwick had been heading to his study when the crash pulled his attention. He was 51 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had been weathered by decisions most people never have to make. He had watched Celeste perform variations of this scene more times than he could count, and had told himself each time that it was her household to run as she saw fit. He watched Laura Beckett's hands, steady, methodical, gathering broken pieces from the floor beside a crying girl, while every other adult in that corridor looked at their shoes. He didn't move. He didn't announce himself. He simply stood in the shadow above it all, and watched a woman he had never seen before refuse to look away from something everyone else had decided wasn't their business. He couldn't have explained right then why it hit him the way it did, but it hit him like something he had been waiting a long time to see. Celeste Vane did not forget. That was the thing about her that the staff understood better than anyone. She had a memory like a steel trap, and the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed the waiting. She didn't retaliate immediately. That would have been beneath her. Instead, she filed it away behind those polished eyes and smiled at Laura the next morning like nothing had happened, which was considerably more frightening than if she had screamed. The extra assignments started Wednesday. Laura found herself with a workload that had quietly doubled overnight. Floors that had already been cleaned added back to her list. Tasks that belonged to other departments suddenly appearing under her name. Schedules rearranged so that her breaks disappeared into the seams of the day. Bess delivered each new addition with the apologetic efficiency of someone following orders she hadn't written and wasn't going to question. Laura accepted every one without comment. She worked through them with the same unhurried steadiness she brought to everything, staying late without complaint, rising earlier without announcement. She had done hard work before. Hard work didn't scare her. Celeste escalated. The public corrections came next. Small performances staged in front of maximum audiences, delivered in that precise, quiet voice that never needed volume to land. A pillowcase folded incorrectly. A window left with a streak. Infractions so minor, they barely qualified as infractions, elevated through tone and audience into indictments. The staff watched these moments with the practiced blankness of people who had learned that visible sympathy had a cost. Laura received each correction with a straight back and a civil nod, and returned to work without visible damage, which was the precise thing Celeste could not tolerate. A woman who wouldn't crumble was a woman who wouldn't confirm what Celeste needed confirmed, that she was the most formidable person in any room she entered. Laura's steadiness wasn't defiance. It was something quieter and more threatening than defiance. It was indifference to the performance, and Celeste felt it like a splinter she couldn't locate. By Thursday, the mansion had divided itself along invisible lines. The staff moved through their days with the particular awareness of people watching a situation develop toward an inevitable point. Nobody spoke about it directly. Nobody had to. It happened at 10:30 in the morning. Celeste called the full household staff to the main reception hall. All of them, kitchen to grounds. An assembly that in 2 years had only ever meant one thing. She stood at the center of the room in a charcoal dress with her hands clasped in front of her, and her expression arranged into something that looked almost sorrowful, which was her most dangerous configuration. The bracelet, she said, was gone. Rose gold, Italian, a gift of considerable sentimental value. She had looked everywhere. She had asked everyone. And she said, pausing just long enough for the weight to distribute itself evenly across every person present. A very strong feeling about where it had gone. Her eyes settled on Laura. The room temperature dropped. Laura stood near the back of the assembled staff, her hands loose at her sides, her expression unchanged. She felt every set of eyes in the room move to her, and felt the collective held breath of people who knew what was coming, and were deeply relieved it wasn't coming for them. "I didn't take it," Laura said. Not loud, not heated, just flat and clear and entirely without apology. The way you state something that doesn't require decoration because it's simply true. Celeste tilted her head the way a cat tilts its head at something it is considering. "I don't recall asking you a question." "You were about to," Laura said. The silence in that room was the kind that presses against your eardrums. Percy, standing 3 people to Laura's left, had stopped breathing entirely. Bess was studying a point on the wall with tremendous focus. Nobody moved. Celeste crossed the room toward Laura with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had never once had to hurry to make a point. She stopped close, closer than conversation required, which was the intention. She was several inches taller than Laura in her heels, and she used every fraction of it. "You've been in this house 4 days," Celeste said softly, "and you have managed in 4 days to make yourself very noticeable. That isn't a compliment." "I didn't take your bracelet," Laura repeated. Something moved behind Celeste's eyes. A decision arriving. Her hand came up, not rushed, almost languid, the gesture of someone who has done this before and expects the familiar outcome. The arc of it was aimed at Laura's left cheek, with the practiced accuracy of a woman who understood exactly how much force communicated exactly the right message. It didn't land. Laura's right hand came up and across in the same moment. Not a block, not a flinch, but a punch. Compact, controlled, generated from the shoulder. The kind of punch that comes from someone who learned long ago that if you're going to do a thing, you do it with full commitment, or you don't do it at all. It connected squarely with Celeste's jaw, and the sound it made was the kind of sound that a room never forgets. Celeste went sideways into the side table, caught herself, and stared at Laura with an expression that had never existed on her face before. Pure, unfiltered shock. The shock of a reality that has just been restructured without permission. The room erupted. 2 guards surged forward from the doorway. Someone knocked into someone else. A chair scraped. 3 people spoke simultaneously, and none of them made sense. "Enough!" One word, from the doorway. Garrett Harwick stood with one hand resting on the frame, still in his morning clothes, having come from the direction of his study. He looked at Celeste, at the hand she had raised to her jaw, at the expression she was still recalibrating, and then he looked at Laura. He held that look for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. The guard stopped moving. The room stopped breathing. Garrett walked in slowly, the crowd parting the way crowds part for people who have never once had to ask them to. He stopped in front of Laura and studied her face the way he studied everything that genuinely interested him. Completely, without rush. "Why?" he said. Just that. Laura looked at him without flinching. "Because she was going to hit me for something I didn't do. And because she's been hitting people in this house for 2 years and nobody has stopped her." She paused. Somebody had to. The words landed in the room like stones dropped in still water, the ripples moving outward to touch every person present. Because every person present knew it was true. They had always known. They had simply decided, one by one, that the cost of saying so was too high. Garrett said nothing for a long moment. His face gave away less than most men's faces gave away. But something behind his eyes, something deep and long settled, moved. He turned and walked back toward the door. "Get back to work," he said to the room. To nobody in particular. To everyone. That night, long after the house went quiet, Celeste's car was packed by 2 staff members who had been given the task without explanation. By morning, the gravel drive held only tire tracks where it had been. No announcement, no farewell, just absence, sudden and total, like a tooth pulled clean. And in the strange new quiet of the Harwick estate, something that had been wound very tight for a very long time began, slowly, cautiously, to loosen. The morning after Celeste left, the Harwick estate woke up differently. It wasn't anything dramatic or visible. No celebration, no collective exhale, no one saying out loud what everyone was feeling. It was subtler than that. It was the cook humming while she worked. It was Percy whistling in the garden without stopping himself halfway through. It was Bess moving through her morning rounds with shoulders that sat 2 inches lower than they had in 2 years. Small things. The kinds of things that only become visible once the weight that was suppressing them is finally gone. Laura noticed all of it. She noticed the way the kitchen girl, her name was Addie, actually smiled at breakfast for the first time since Laura had arrived. She noticed the way the older staff members made eye contact with each other in the corridors, brief and meaningful, the silent language of people who have survived something together and are only now beginning to believe it's over. She went about her work the same way she always did, steady, methodical, unbothered by the shift in atmosphere, because she hadn't come here for the atmosphere. She had come here to work, and the work was the same regardless of what the house felt like around it. She wasn't naive enough to think that Celeste's departure solved everything. She understood that a house took on the character of its owner far more than its occupants. And the owner of this house was a man she had exchanged exactly one conversation with, and that conversation had lasted 40 seconds. Garrett Harwick was everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. That was the particular skill of powerful men who had learned to command through presence rather than proximity. He didn't need to be in a room for the room to know he could enter it at any moment. His study light was on before anyone else was awake, and still on long after the house had gone quiet for the night. His movements through the estate were unpredictable in their timing, but precise in their purpose. He never wandered, never lingered without intention, never occupied a space without a reason for being in it. Except once. It was a Thursday evening, 10 days after Celeste's departure, and Laura was in the garden cutting back the rose beds along the east wall, a task that had fallen behind during the upheaval, and that she had added to her list without being asked. The light was going golden and long, the way early autumn light does in the late afternoon, turning everything it touches briefly, unreasonably beautiful. She was working with her sleeves rolled up, and her focus entirely on what was in front of her when she became aware, without turning around, that someone was standing at the garden entrance. She had grown up reading rooms. She could read open spaces, too. She kept working. "You didn't have to do that," Garrett said from behind her. "The roses, that's not your assignment." "They needed doing," Laura said. She clipped a stem and set it in the basket beside her. "So I'm doing it." A pause. Then the sound of him walking across the grass toward the stone bench at the garden's center, unhurried, deliberate, and sitting down. Not leaving. She turned to look at him then, because ignoring a man who has chosen to stay is its own kind of statement, and she wasn't interested in making it. He looked different outside the context of the house's interior. Still formidable, that didn't leave a man like Garrett Harwick when he stepped into a garden, but something in the outdoor light stripped away the layers of authority and performance, and left something more plainly human underneath. He was looking at the rose beds with the expression of a man who is using one thing to think about something else entirely. "You've been here almost 2 weeks," he said. 12 days, Laura confirmed. "And you've managed to restructure the entire dynamic of my household staff, end my engagement, and take on tasks that aren't yours." He looked at her then. "That's a considerable amount of activity for someone who came here to clean." "I came here to work," Laura said. "That's not always the same thing." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "No," he said. "I suppose it isn't." They were quiet for a moment. The garden held the silence comfortably, the way outdoor spaces do. It didn't press the way interior silence presses. Laura set down her clippers and straightened up, giving him her full attention, because she had learned that half attention was its own form of disrespect, and she didn't deal in disrespect, regardless of direction. "You're not afraid of me," Garrett said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't quite a question. It was the observation of a man who has encountered something unfamiliar and is trying to categorize it honestly. "I'm afraid of men who use power as a substitute for character," Laura said. "I haven't decided what you're a substitute for yet." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a careful answer." "It's an honest one." Another silence. Longer this time. A bird moved through the hedgerow at the garden's edge and was gone. Garrett laced his hands together between his knees and looked at the ground in the way that people look at the ground when they're actually looking inward. "My father built this organization," he said eventually. "He built it on a particular philosophy, that fear is the most reliable currency because it doesn't fluctuate. People's loyalty fluctuates. Their greed fluctuates. Their love certainly fluctuates." He paused. "Fear you can count on." "Your father was wrong," Laura said. He looked up. "Fear doesn't make people loyal," she said. "It makes them compliant. Those aren't the same thing. Compliant people do what you need them to do right up until the moment they get a better option. Loyal people don't leave when a better option arrives." She held his gaze. "Your staff was compliant under Celeste. Watch what they become now that they're not afraid." Garrett studied her face with the focused attention he usually reserved for problems requiring solutions. "How do you know that?" Laura was quiet for a moment. The golden light was fading, the garden moving into the softer blue of early evening. "My father worked for men like your father," she said finally. "Good man, honest man. Did everything that was asked of him for 22 years. She picked up her clippers again, not to use them, just to have something in her hands. When he got sick and couldn't work anymore, those men let him go without a second thought. We lost the house. We lost everything. My mother worked 3 jobs for 4 years to keep us together." She looked at him directly. "Compliant, not loyal. There's a difference. And the people who pay that difference are never the ones who created it." The garden held what she had said without rushing to fill the space around it. Garrett didn't respond immediately, which he had come to understand was not absence of thought, but the presence of it. He was a man who processed things fully before he spoke, which was rarer than it should have been. "I let it happen," he said finally. "What Celeste did in this house. I told myself it wasn't my concern, that running a household was her domain." He said it with the flat candor of a man making an accounting, rather than an excuse. "That was a failure of character. Mine, not hers." Laura looked at him. Outside of her father, she had met very few men capable of saying a sentence like that, without immediately following it with a qualification that took it back. "Yes," she said simply. "It was." He nodded slowly, accepting it the way you accept something you already knew, but needed to hear confirmed. He stood from the bench and buttoned his jacket with the habitual precision of a man who kept himself assembled out of long practice. "Finish the roses," he said, "and then go inside. It's getting cold." He walked back toward the house without waiting for her response. Laura watched him go and then turned back to the rose beds, her clippers steady in her hand, the evening light going blue and quiet around her. Something had shifted in that garden. She could feel it the same way she could feel a room's tension. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, but with the particular certainty of someone who has spent a lifetime paying attention to things other people let themselves miss. She wasn't sure yet what it meant, but she was sure it meant something. The change in Garrett Harwick didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with a declaration or a dramatic gesture, or any of the theatrical displays that powerful men typically use to signal their own transformation. It came quietly, the way the most permanent changes always come, incrementally, in the texture of daily decisions, visible only to people paying close enough attention to notice the difference between who someone was last month and who they are becoming now. His men noticed first. That was the thing about men who operate in dangerous organizations. They are exquisitely attuned to shifts in leadership because their survival depends on reading those shifts correctly and adjusting accordingly. The calls to violence that used to come quickly now came only after every other option had been exhausted. The punishments that used to be designed to send messages were redesigned around necessity, not softness, Garrett Harwick was constitutionally incapable of softness, and nobody who worked for him would have respected it anyway. But restraint, deliberate, chosen restraint, the kind that is infinitely harder than its opposite, and infinitely more powerful. The city noticed too. In the particular ecosystem of organized power, behavior change at the top filters downward and outward with surprising speed. Old alliances that had grown strained began quietly stabilizing. Men who had been watching the Harwick organization for signs of vulnerability found instead signs of something they hadn't anticipated. Steadiness. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. But it was Laura who noticed most completely, because she was inside it every day, moving through the house with her steady, unhurried attention. And she watched the change the way you watch something grow, too gradual to see in any single moment, undeniable across the span of weeks. She noticed the morning he sat with the groundskeeping staff for 20 minutes over coffee, rather than issuing instructions and leaving. She noticed when he reinstated the health benefits for household employees that had been quietly cut 2 years prior. No announcement, just a memo from the estate's accounting office, matter of fact, as though it had always been this way. She noticed the afternoon he walked past the kitchen and stopped when he heard Addie laughing at something Percy said through the window, and stood there for just a moment, with an expression on his face that looked remarkably like satisfaction. She noticed, and noticing scared her, if she was being completely honest with herself. Because Laura Beckett had spent her adult life maintaining very clear sight lines. She knew what she was, she knew what rooms she belonged in, and she had made peace with the geography of her life, long before she walked through the Harwick gate. Feelings that complicated that geography were feelings she didn't have space for. She had told herself that firmly and regularly, and with complete sincerity. It was working perfectly until the night the threat arrived. She heard it from Bess, fragments, delivered in a low, urgent voice outside the linen room on a Wednesday evening. A faction from the South Side, men who had read Garrett's restraint as weakness, exactly as Laura had predicted to him in the garden, and had decided to test the hypothesis with aggression. There had been an incident at one of the organization's business interests downtown, an escalating series of provocations designed to force a response or expose the absence of one. The estate had moved to a heightened security posture overnight, additional guards on the perimeter, vehicles repositioned, communication protocols tightened. Bess told her quietly and with genuine concern that arrangements were being made to move the household staff to secondary accommodations until the situation resolved. Comfortable, safe, temporary. Standard protocol. Garrett had insisted on it. Laura listened to all of it carefully. Then she went back to work. The following morning, Bess returned with the specifics. A car would come at noon to take the residential staff to the secondary property. Laura's bag should be packed and ready by the side entrance. It was not a request, Bess added, with the gentle, apologetic firmness of someone delivering a message they know will meet resistance. "Tell him thank you," Laura said, "and tell him I'm staying." Bess stared at her. "Laura, I heard you clearly, Bess. Tell him thank you and tell him I'm staying." She had thought it through the night before with the same methodical honesty she brought to everything. She was not staying out of recklessness. She understood what a credible threat from a hostile faction meant in practical terms, and she wasn't interested in pretending otherwise. She was staying because she had spent her entire life watching good people calculate the cost of involvement, find it too high, and remove themselves, leaving the people who stayed to carry a weight that should have been shared. Her father had stayed in a system that didn't deserve him, because leaving would have meant abandoning the people around him who had no other options. She understood staying. She understood what it cost and what it was worth. And if she was honest, fully, uncomfortably honest, she was staying because walking away from this house now felt like walking away from something she hadn't finished yet. Something that wasn't the work. Garrett found her in the library at 11:30. She was reshelving a section that had been neglected, and she heard him come in and kept working, because stopping felt like a concession she wasn't ready to make. "You were supposed to be packed," he said from the doorway. "I was," she said. "I unpacked." A long pause. "This isn't a negotiation, Laura." "No," she agreed. It isn't. She turned around then and looked at him directly. He was wearing the particular expression of a man who is trying to be angry and finding something else in the way. I'm not one of your staff that you can move around a board for safekeeping, Garrett. I'm a person who has made a decision about where she's going to be. I'd like you to respect that. He crossed the room in the way he crossed every room, like he had already decided how it ended before he started. He stopped in front of her close enough that she had to look up to hold his eyes, which she did without difficulty. If something happened to you, he said, and then stopped. Started again. I have spent 30 years making sure that the things I care about are protected. I'm not... He stopped again. The words were clearly coming from somewhere he didn't usually let words come from, and they were moving slowly because of it. I don't know how to do this without controlling it. I'm aware of that. I'm working on it. I know you are, Laura said quietly. Then let me keep you safe. You can keep me safe here, she said. You don't have to move me somewhere else to do it. The rain that had been threatening all morning arrived then, a steady drumming against the library windows that filled the silence between them with something that felt less like absence and more like presence. Garrett looked at her face in the way he had looked at it since the very first time in the corridor. Like she was a problem he had stopped wanting to solve and started wanting to understand. My whole life, he said, the things I felt strongly about were things I could act on, situations I could control, threats I could neutralize. He exhaled slowly. You are the first thing in 30 years that I feel strongly about that I cannot control. And I want to be honest with you about how unfamiliar that territory is for me. Laura looked at this man, this complicated, weathered, genuinely trying man, and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized as the particular piece of a decision already made becoming conscious of itself. My mother used to say that the bravest thing a strong man can do is need someone, she said. She said most of them never get there. They spend their whole lives being strong in the wrong direction. She held his gaze steady. You got there, Garrett. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. He reached for her hand then. Not with the commanding certainty of a man used to taking what he wants, but with the careful, almost tentative gesture of someone asking a question they genuinely don't know the answer to. His hand was large and scarred and slightly rough, and it held hers like something worth being careful with. She let her fingers close around his. He exhaled, long and slow and from somewhere deep, and she understood that sound completely. It was the sound of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time, finally setting it down in the presence of someone else. The threat from the south side resolved within the week, handled with the precision and restraint that had become the new signature of the Harwick organization. No excess, no brutality beyond necessity, no messages sent through cruelty. The faction recalculated and withdrew. Old partners re-engaged. The estate returned to its normal rhythms, but the normal it returned to was not the normal it had left. The house carried itself differently now. The staff moved through it with the ease of people who feel genuinely secure, rather than merely unharmed. Addie had started a small herb garden outside the kitchen door that nobody had asked for, and everyone had silently decided was exactly right. Percy whistled constantly, and nobody asked him to stop. Bess had developed the habit of leaving a pot of coffee in the front sitting room on Sunday mornings. And somehow, gradually, without anyone planning it, it had become the place where the household gathered for half an hour before the week began. Garrett sat in that room on a Sunday morning 6 weeks later, with a coffee cup in one hand, and Laura beside him on the settee, close enough that their shoulders touched, while the rest of the house moved around them with the comfortable noise of people who are not afraid. He was reading something. She was looking out the window at the grounds where the autumn was turning everything gold, and letting herself feel, without qualification or apology, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. You know what I keep thinking about? Garrett said without looking up from what he was reading. Tell me. That corridor, the first day. You walked forward when every other person in that house walked back. He turned the page. I keep thinking about what kind of person does that, what they're made of. Laura considered it. Someone who got tired of watching the wrong people win, she said. Garrett nodded slowly. He turned another page. Outside the window, the grounds were gold and still, and the morning was long and unhurried in the way that mornings become when fear has finally left a house for good. The most feared man in the city had his coffee. He had the morning. He had the woman beside him who had walked into his house with sensible shoes and a quiet spine, and rearranged everything worth keeping. He had, for the first time in 30 years, exactly enough. That's a wrap on this one. And if this story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you of something true, please hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, ring that notification bell, and share this with someone who appreciates a good story about backbone, growth, and love that actually means something. We'll see you in the next one.